Are you in love? Well, you're hysterical. Are you indifferent to patients that infuriate your friends? You're hysterical, but a chaste one. Do you cheat on your husband? You're hysterical. You lie about everything? Hysterical. Do you steal in shops? Are you greedy? Are you nervous? Hysterical. Are you this or that? Are you only what all women are since the world is world? Hysterical, I said, and we are all hysterical. What? I'm not insulting you, I promise. But those words are written by a French writer, a very famous one, named Guy de Maupassant in 1882. 1882, yeah. What do they tell us today? What those words have to do with you? Thanks to God, hysteria seems to be a very old disease we do not mention anymore. I am more rational than a hysterical person, I promise. But basically, actually, this tirade tells a lot about you, it tells a lot about me, because you're not the one to decide if you're hysterical or not. Politicians will do it for you. This tirade shows up that any time in history, in our civilization, major problems of the society are female sex guilt. They fall in love, they cheat, they lie, they steal, they are greedy, nervous, all that, of course, because they do have a uterus. That's the literary word of hysteria, of course, you know that. Because of their matrix, this wild and starving animal, would say Greek philosopher Plato, nice Plato, thank you, that moves itself inside the body and causes the worst disease of the world, all that because of a woman. And well, because of that very same organ we do have between our legs, women are the cause of every social problem, and they are a political issue. The perfect scapegoat. It makes them unstable and unfaithful, and we should better make restrictive laws, invent medical treatments to be sure we have our hands on it, and that this organ, the savage one, is under control. Well, I'm 32. I do live in a country named France that thinks actually invented freedom. And I never thought before, during that study for my book, that my sex should be a national matter or a political object, truly. I have total access to contraception. I have the right to choose whether I want to become a mother or not. I have the freedom to use my own body. But what I took for granted for now is actually the result of political choices that can be threatened or undone tomorrow. And so I recently, as said just before my very nice colleague today, I recently published this book named Forbidden Flesh. It's a new history of female organs and how, since the world is world, men have thought the place of their birth and pleasure. And trust me, I've been mocked, just by thinking this was a very interesting intellectual object, dignified of interest, just mentioning female organs. I've been quite mocked. But also, I've been refused to many TV or radio programs. Censorship in the country that he thought invented liberty. But during book signatures, I met a lot of women that came to me and just said, thank you, I never understood actually why sometimes I felt so ashamed of myself. And this is pretty much the story of our lives. I'm pretty sure most part of you everyday present has already felt the shame about her own anatomy, about losing her virginity, about not being able to have children or being pregnant too soon, too early for herself, for her family anyway. This is the point, that is to say that female pleasure, contraception, abortion, motherhood, or rape legislations all depends on politics and on political choices. In some civilization, in some country, or in some time period, you will not be able to live in your own body the same way that you are today. And all those fields of your personal life will be dictated by politicians. If you trust a second, it's a lot of parts of your personal life that will be so. You should be aware that in history, they are always oriented their decision to what is best for them and not what is best for your health or your happiness. Well, this is the story I'm going to tell you with few examples. I'm trying to be short, promise. And and show you that how women's organ has been dramatically linked to politics since the world is world, and how many fields of your personal life has been dictated by politics. When Maupassant actually wrote those lines at the end of 19th century in France, the woman belongs to the man. The wife is her husband's possession. She cannot work nor take major decisions for her own life without him. She's excluded for political rights, college, university, and adultery is actually punished by 2 years jail. That does not worth the try, definitely. Let's be clear, the worst ones are the ones considered in the very, very bad way, the one inclined to free sexual behavior, women seeking for their own pleasure. They are said hysterical. Actually, this is Maupassant's point. The worst of them, onanists, women pleasing themselves. This is actually the worst that could happen to politicians those times. I quote, the politicians call just women pleasing themselves sexually the most horrible crime against nature that ruins humankind and destroys morality. Sounds great, no? Sounds very funny. Well, the moralists were back then. And you might think today this very private practice, let's say, has actually nothing to do anymore with politics. You are wrong, because this actually can turn back. When women are a little bit too excessive or were a little bit too hysterical or nymphomaniac, that was the diagnosis for them, to control those abnormal sex drive, a treatment has been invented by French and English people back then. Watch your ears, it's a very painful one. It's actually excision. In 19th century in Europe, France, and England mostly, many doctors experimented this treatment on thousands of women to cure them from sexual pleasure, because it's considered that a disease that threatens politics and the stability of the country. We owe this delightful treatment to an Austrian surgeon from Vienna named Gustav Braun, and he's the first to propose this clitoridectomy, let's say, as a remedy to temptation for women. Another one is an English surgeon named Isaac Baker Brown, and he's the president of the very prestigious Medical Society of London, so we are not talking about very unknown doctors, but very, very mass ones, very important ones. And if that's not enough, other options are thought. The removal of the ovaries too, because this is, of course, the place of desire. So if we took that off, women will be more inclined to stay home. We're talking about 100,000 patients there in 19th century until 1920, actually. So it's very recent. Nearly a century ago, we were still doing those kind of surgeries. And one question has come to my mind, but why in Europe in 19th century, I mean, almost a century ago, female pleasure can be such a threat? Because women having free access to their anatomy, they could emancipate. They could ask for freedom, they could take men's right to pleasure, men's work, and leave their homes and family. This is the threat. This is why women being hungry for sex is a social nightmare and so a political problem. And also, how can that be? I mean, do you know anything more visceral, more intimate than the survival of the species, the transmission of identity, of national value and family? Well, this is our job, actually, because of our sex. Just think of the way in which man has always viewed the female organs as both the birth of his birth and his pleasure, and you will understand that nowhere on earth there is a more privileged place to project every ideology man has always invented. Let me give you some examples. I mentioned before contraception, for example. Have you ever heard about Ernst Grafenberg? You should. He's known for finding out the G-spot, G like Grafenberg, that's his name. He was a German Jew doctor living in Germany, specialized in gynecology at the beginning of 20th century. And after World War I, he consulted in Berlin to help women who wanted to conceive to have children in a good way, and women who didn't want to conceive not to have children. And let's say that in the year 30 in Germany, it was not exactly fashion. When Hitler comes to power, he wants women to collaborate to his Reich. But how that? Just by assuming their biological role, they should be mothers, that's all. That's all we literally ask to them. And promote sex without children, it's not really something he likes. And so Grafenberg, that remained silent to political pressures and in jail, in prison actually, and women would have to wait another time to be helped. That is very interesting because, so you might think that for Hitler, for example, or for his political regime, contraception is something totally unacceptable, totally forbidden. Not exactly. Not when it serves his political goals. He is the one to decide. Because, for example, in 1943, another doctor called Karl Klauberg, also a gynecologist, invents for him a method to sterilize without surgery many women by a simple injection directly in the uterus, the one that makes people call you hysterical. And he writes to Heinrich Himmler that with one single injection, he would be able to make that one doctor can sterilize 1,000 women per day. So when it comes to prevent a woman being pregnant, it's not about her choice. Her choice is not involved. It's what the politician has to do with his own goals. It can be also, it can be totally acceptable if that's what he wants. It can be totally forbidden if it's not his goal. That is interesting because we discover that something very, very intimate as contraception is not a personal choice, actually. This is a very speaking example of political relativism concerning female organ and your own personal life and your power to give birth. Same thing happened if you consider abortion, let's say. During World War II in France, abortion was not only forbidden, but considered like high treason. You could actually die for that. The punishment was or banishment or death. Quite a severe punishment. And because during World War II, after France began to lose war, the Maréchal Pétain, the one that negotiates the German occupation, just says something that he declares that too few children and too few weapons are the cause of our defeat. The cause of French defeat in the battle is only because women decided to stop obeying the rice propagation law. Not only because the army was weak, not only because he took very bad strategy advices. No, it's the fault of women that does not give enough children, that does not collaborate with their sex enough to the war effort. This is very strange because, again, you will think that abortion is totally forbidden. No, because when it serves political goals, it becomes totally acceptable. You know, which is the first politician to allow abortion? Actually, is Lenin, one of the Russian dictator that you will never think able to do so. So he wanted a big nation, he wanted to go to war, and he decides actually to legalize abortion because he wants to prove the rest of Europe that his politics, his social state will make so that even if women have the right to do that, they will choose not to because he will provide them such a happy life that they will all decide that no abortion will be necessary at all. So you can see that it always depends on how politicians decide. You can consider in China, for example, under Mao Zedong, it was totally forbidden. But since the 80s, to make the one-child policy, we have a lot of abortion. It's not only allowed, it's obligatory. It's something very, very obligatory. 20 million forced abortion has been made in 1 year, the year they decided, the year they decided to make the one-child policy. So if we consider history, and the female sex issue, it's all about political position that seems very relative. And also, for something very less serious, let's say intimate shaving. Have you ever thought that this could be political too? Well, it is actually. During French Renaissance or during Renaissance actually in Europe, it has been a sign of very independence for women. They decided to shave their between their legs to show that as men their body is able to feel pleasure, and that they rule their own body, that man does not decide. But turns out that it is also, shaving a woman is also, since antiquity, a way to punish women for taking pleasure or cheating on their husbands. I found that in Egypt or in summer, you can track down that actually shaving a woman between her legs, a pubic hair, is a sign of slavery, a sign of treason during antiquity. We will find the same thing actually during Spanish War or during the French World War, French liberation. We will shave women not only on their head but also on their pubic hair. Let's say that today in a lot of female magazines, we do see this very fashionable way of shaving us that is said to be the very acme of liberation and women's freedom. We don't have to, we do not forget, we should not forget, sorry, that it's actually when politicians decide to do it that it's become a sign of slavery. So the way you will shave yourself, the way you will consider contraception or abortion will always be a matter of politics. And you should know about it because today fundamentalists of all kinds are a danger to women. And what you think are your rights and your rights could be actually taken back from you. You might have noticed that today in the United States, many Republicans or many politicians are making a lot of cuts on abortion centers, like 700 centers just closed in the past 2 months. They just say that it's Republican Todd Atkins, actually, that say that abortion should not be allowed, even in case of rape, because in case of a real rape, the woman cannot be pregnant. Otherwise, she took pleasure. Let's come back with that word again and the political conception. She took pleasure, and so she kind of is guilty too, and she's not allowed to make abortion. How fun is that? Even in the case of incest. Another very, very sympathetic Republican just says that abortion should be a crime, like in French World War II, you know? And so everywhere the threat is coming back. In Spain, also in France, this month at the Assembly, 7 deputies just called to cut back and to cut back the abortion law that just has been 40 years now by Simone Veil in France. So the threat is everywhere. And this declaration makes me tremble because human history and European history has told me that they lead to not a marvelous place where men and women are happy together. It's usually the first sign of nationalism, of economical crisis that makes men feel threatened and feel like putting their hands on the female sex and its power and say, this is mine, and as long as this is mine, I will not be threatened. So sometimes, in times of political or economical crisis, we do have to be careful that men tend to put their hands back on the female pleasure, on the female reproduction, and to limit its freedom. But how can that be avoided? Because there has to be a hope, of course. Well, first of all, being aware of that history and being aware of those personal feeds of your lives are dictated by politicians. You can choose like Leg McBowie, maybe you've heard about her. She's the Liberian woman that helped destituting the Liberian dictator Charles Taylor by making the sex strike, the crossed leg war. She had actually a Peace Nobel Prize for that. She incitated the women of her country to refuse themselves to their husband until the dictator was not out of the country, until they would not make an effort for peace. Well, this could actually be used in some places in the world today that, yeah. But anyway, the more important thing should be that women should take political power, because that will be the only way not to be anymore the scapegoat, the victims of their choices. in my country, France, but also in your country. Maybe we do miss a new generation of women that will take part in education, educating men and educated women, of course, on science more than fundamentalism, and to explain that there's nothing to fear about female sex and its power to give birth. And being head of state, they could acknowledge this science above fundamentalism and show that we would no longer be called hysterical just because of our sex.